Way to Peak Nutrition podcast. It is Lindsay and I back again this week after a fairly long hiatus, and we've got several different questions you guys have written in over the last several weeks, and I try to answer them whenever they come in, but I've also been compiling them in a separate document so we could go back and do, more of a long form conversation. So we're going to tackle a couple of those this week. And I like these in particular because they've not been asked before. So number one.
This question is about discretionary calories. The person said, you have talked before about limiting discretionary calorie intake. What does that mean? Why? And what would be a good amount to aim for?
Yeah, it is a good question. And it is something that comes up quite a bit within like the coaching program in and of itself. So discretionary calories, we'll start with what it means, why my suggestion is to try to keep it low, and then a number that would be good to aim for. So discretionary is exactly what it sounds like. It's calories that aren't really contributing towards your nutrition, or if you've got any specific goals or anything of that nature. I think like the best way to think of them would be anything that's just like discretionary spending is just fun spending, like just kind of blowing your money on fun stuff. This would be blowing your calories on fun stuff. So candy or ice cream or, foods that don't really have much nutrition in them, but may pack a fair amount of calories. Like I'm apprehensive to say that people would funnel this under the category of junk food, but, a lot of people would, although there's other food like that maybe wouldn't be. Like I would throw pizza in here as a discretionary calorie intake. You're smiling.
We had pizza for dinner tonight and there's none left. So
our discretionary fund is gone. Why do I suggest that? Like the patterns that I've seen in the years that I've done this, because like when you're in the one-on-one coaching program, part of the process is me going through and not just talking about calories, but really looking at strategies to help you get your calories to line up with whatever the goal is. And so like a common theme that I've seen is one, people, when they first start, especially have a large percentage of their calories going towards these discretionary calories. Now, my theory, my philosophy is calories in, calories out in the sense of it's an equation if you're trying to lose weight. However, you would argue, well, if that's the case, then what's wrong with them dedicating so many of these calories towards these, fun items? Nothing, except for they're usually complaining about how hungry they are and how the meal doesn't sit with them very long and how, they find themselves getting really hungry later in the day. And so this sort of leads into the section as to why I suggest not having too many from that. Is because it's really, really easy to either A, go way over your calories without, trying to, or B, you're just hungry all the time. And people tend to think that if I'm hungry, it means I'm not getting enough calories. That's not necessarily true. You could be getting plenty of calories, but the formatting in which you're eating, like not having much to eat until later in the day, can mess with that. Or what you are eating, what's comprising those calories can mess with that. So, that's why my typical suggestion is to try to keep those fairly low. So what's a good amount to aim for? I always suggest, I shouldn't say always, usually suggest no more than 10% of your daily intake. Now, bear in mind, many programs that a lot of people are used to following would say you can't have any of the foods that are discretionary calories. So by allowing 10%, you're talking about a person who has a calorie budget of 2,200 calories every day dedicated towards whatever it is that they want. Most candy bars are 250 calories or less. So it still is a fair amount, but 10% sort of seems to be the line that I've seen where it's like, yeah, you still are able to manage your desire to have some of that and have fun stuff. But you've also got 90% going towards really good nutrient dense foods that are fueling you, that are helping you stay full, that are providing you, what you want in terms of what you've laid out as your goals. So What do you think your discretionary calorie percentage is?
I think I do the reverse 90/10. 90% of the time I eat what I want. 10% of the time I think, I owe it to somebody somewhere to try to maybe make a better choice. So I pull an apple out rather than extra chips, but probably 90/10.
Yeah, it's a great question. All right, number two.
The next question says, what are your thoughts on getting some blood work done? It's been a while, so I thought it might be wise. However, I don't want to do it just to do it. Any thoughts on what I might specifically be tested for other than the usual?
Yeah, this is great. And this is becoming more and more popular, sometimes in a negative sense. Like sometimes there's an overemphasis on getting labs done, and those are the gospel, and you need to treat them right away. And I'll never forget working in a hospital under some of the intensive care unit docs saying, like, you never treat a lab. You're always trying to find the reason that lab is abnormal and fixing the reason rather than treating the lab. Lab values hold two purposes. Number one, they can be a picture of that point in time, right? It's just telling you at that point in time, at that window, when you went to go get that lab drawn, this is where you stood on these certain parameters. The second thing, and of more value than that, is it can show trends over time, right? So if you get these drawn multiple times over multiple years, you start to build a trend, and that trend is indicative of your health and your potential future, either positive or negatively, right? And so I think that that's good. If you're getting them drawn and you're looking at it, okay, as an analysis of, okay, here's where I am at in terms of my health during this window in time, it can cue you to say, oh, I didn't know that, and I need to go fix X, Y, or Z thing, get them redrawn 3 months, 6 months down the line, see if that change held effect. So I think that they do hold value. However, you're right. You don't want to do it to just do it. You have to know, what your expectation is, that realistic, and then what are you going to do with it? I think that, we've grown to know more about lab values. I think it's still good to get a general metabolic panel, which is your typical sodium, potassium, kidney function test, liver function test, etc. I think it's good to get those because it's a good window. It's a good picture of your overall health. I think that maybe these three, like if I, like when I got this question, I didn't want to sit here and give you 700 laps to go get drawn with all these different things. So I thought, like, if I were to meet somebody on an elevator and they asked me, what do you feel like three things to go get labs on are good to get outside of your typical metabolic panel? I would say number one, get a lab drawn for your heart risk that shows your heart risk. That's typically going to be a lipid panel, which is cholesterol and all of the things that fall under that umbrella: HDL, LDL, VLDL, all of those, which are typically a part of every metabolic panel, triglycerides, etc. And then as a part of that, something they've started testing more is ApoB, apolipoprotein B, which again, like all of these numbers together collectively are giving us a better picture of what a person's heart health is versus us, 20, 30 years ago, you look at cholesterol and say, cholesterol is high, you're going to die of a heart attack. Well, we've learned that that's not necessarily true. We've also learned that that can be fixed and a lot of that risk goes away. So I would get something to evaluate what my heart risk is. Number two, I'd get something to evaluate what my endocrine function is, or my diabetes risk, glucose, hemoglobin A1C, and those are going to be able to tell you whether you're at risk of developing diabetes, if you have diabetes, if you've improved in terms of your markers for diabetes. So I think that that's an important one to get. And then I think one for metabolism, which would be like getting the different thyroid tests done, testosterone tests done, different hormone tests done like that, and maybe even cortisol, to sort of explain. I'm indifferent on cortisol. I'll come back to that in a minute. I think it's good to get these done in particular if you're trying to change something for training and performance, and if you're trying to do anything different with your weight. Because you could throw all your efforts into a basket, but if you've got these underlying abnormal lab issues going on, those efforts will be, I won't call them fruitless, but you will see very little fruit for the amount of effort you're giving, and that can be very mentally defeating. So in that situation, you're going to want to correct the issue and then tackle whatever your goals are with training, performance, etc.
Why would, I mean, depending on the number, high or low is good or bad, right? Why would specific numbers affect the goal of weight loss or training or something like that?
Yeah, so this is a great question. We'll use thyroid. I think that's a really good example. You could have an abnormally low thyroid for a variety of different reasons, right? And when that happens, your calorie needs are so low to lose weight that it's challenging to ever eat that little, right? So I'm going to make up a over exaggerated excuse just to drive the point home. If you had, how old are you? 37? If you had a 37-year-old woman who weighed, let's say, 160 pounds, and she was 5'10", and she needed, with a normal functioning thyroid, 1,700 calories per day to lose weight. You could have that same woman with those same stats, height, weight, age, etc., with a low thyroid who was unable to lose weight eating even 1,200, 1,100, right? And so now you're asking people with low thyroids, hey, go eat 800 calories and you'll lose weight. They'll lose it, but 800 calories is like, I mean, it's bare minimum. You're not going to, your discretionary calories go down to 80, right? So it would be better to know what those numbers are just to rule out you're not the zebra in the pack of horses, and then get those fixed. Now, in our culture right now, this has all become the rage. Like, get all these different lab values and get all these tests. And any abnormality means you're unable to lose weight or you're unable to achieve your health or whatever. I've found there to be maybe a little too much of an overemphasis there, it, um, when you compare it to actual practice and practically working with people. The reason I said earlier I'm sort of on the fence about cortisol is because that's going to be indicative of stress. Who's not stressed, right? I mean, for anybody who has any responsibility, you're going to feel some degree of stress, and that's a marker at that moment in time. So if this is a really bad time of life for you, I mean, it's been a challenging 5 or 6 weeks for you in particular. If you were to go get that tested, of course it's going to be high, but people are taking that as though it's like, oh, well, therein lies my situation. And it's like, that's maybe a part of it in this window of time, but it's not the issue that's prevented you from, moving the needle in the past. Number 3.
The next question says, of your relapsers, what's been the biggest reason? Sure, everyone can assume this person is asking about people that have maybe no longer reaching their goals. They were doing great and then fell off the wagon, so to speak, something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is hard to narrow down the biggest reasons people, and I think like the heart of this question is of people who have had success, what made them then either, drop in performance and training, or what made them regain the weight, or what made them go in the inverse of whatever their actual goal was when they started. And I would say it's a couple of things. Number one, there's about 3 to 4 or 5 core habits that we try to establish with everyone. They stop doing any of those, right? And so our program is broken up into 3 different phases. You have the audit phase, the goal phase, and then the maintenance phase. And when you get to maintenance, you get a lot more flexibility and liberty and choice, and you get a ton more flexibility. But it's not going back to what you had previously done either, right? It doesn't mean that when you get to maintenance, your discretionary calories move from 10% per day up to 90 and you expect nothing different to happen. It's going to. You can't completely abandon the habits that we work so hard to form in over the course of those weeks. So they generally stop doing one of those habits. As a part of that, there's usually something that serves as the catalyst that makes them stop doing those things. They go on vacation, it's the holidays, they get busy, they get a new job, they move. There's some sort of catalyst that knocks them out of rhythm and routine. And then that tends to be the thing that causes them to just stop doing those habits. And habits, unfortunately, if you're not in the rhythm of doing them, are as easy to stop doing as they were hard to start doing. And so it really is one of those deals where if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And I would say that that's probably the two greatest things. And I'll say this too, of the people that we've talked to who this has happened to, it's not lost on them that this happened, right? They recognize where it happened. It's not like they're surprised by it. They're not shocked. It was a series of steps that led to a total trend shift in the way that they were doing things, as opposed to, oh, like, I don't know what happened. They stopped doing their exercise. They stopped getting their steps in during the day. They stop trying to get protein in with each meal. They stop having, nutrient dense snacks and start eating really calorie dense snacks. So there's several different core things that change as a part of that, and that tends to be the initiating thing that serves as the catalyst to where they give up one or multiple of these different behaviors.
This question was asked of your relapsers, meaning probably people that you've worked with directly, they've seen success. Why do they relapse? This isn't something that you've hit on specifically with Valley to Peak in the process that you work through with people, but something that you've mentioned a lot in the hospital. And when I've asked about certain fad diets and asked about, just different ways that the bodies work and what happens over time and whatnot, you've often said that in working with people overall, one of the main reasons why people relapse or don't have success long term is because they choose something that is not sustainable for them. I think probably weight loss or certain goals in general never seem attainable, but the method of getting there, you've seen over and over when people first come to Valley to Peak and say, I've tried this and this and this and this and this, and nothing ever works. It's often because it's not sustainable long term.
That is true, but like when they come to Valley to Peak, a very core part, an important piece for me that I'm constantly evaluating while they're in it is, are they understanding nutrition? This isn't just me sending them suggestions and, oh, well, here's your meal plan or your new numbers for the week or whatever. It is coming up with strategies. It's walking through things. It's really trying to get them to understand nutrition so they can be successful long term as opposed to following some sort of a fad diet. So when they do relapse, it's not lack of understanding. Like, oh, I started chasing something new, or I didn't know that would happen that way. It's generally that they give up those habits and behaviors, right? And so, like I've often joked that I need to change the third phase of the program from maintenance to something else, because maintenance almost insinuates like you've reached the pinnacle and now you can stop. It does get a lot easier. You get a lot more liberty. You get a lot more flexibility. There's not as much, focus on it, nearly as much focus on it. But yes, if you give up some of the great habits you established while reaching the goal, it's not magic. You'll go back to the way you were before you reached the goal. So, the hope is that throughout the time in here, you're learning how nutrition works, but you're also developing strategies that build habits that are so ingrained in you that by the time you do reach maintenance, you can't not keep doing them because like it just feels so foreign to you not to do them.
You hit on this briefly. You said, it's not lost on them that they fell back or, gained weight or didn't meet their goals. Like they realize that they have relapsed a bit. And though I can't hear their side of the conversation, I just hear sometimes your responses when you're on a call or whatnot. often I'll hear you say, and this is to more long-term people, long-term meaning they've been in the program, right? I'll hear you say things like, okay, okay, so that happened, they're maybe bummed that they gained weight or they didn't have the energy to do something or they didn't perform well in a race or something. And I hear you ask that, and then you'll say, well, do you know what happened? It is clear based on your response to them, though I'm not sure what they're saying, that they do realize what happened. And it's not some huge thing that they missed. It's usually, you've told me before, they'll say, oh, I kind of quit tracking, or I was traveling, so I wasn't making as much food. It seems to be little changes to get back on track as opposed to, man, I gained all of this weight back. It's usually a pretty quick fix from what you've said and what you've noticed.
Yeah, it's always a quick fix. It's not lost on them, and it's like, to their credit, they're always really honest, which I appreciate. And there's no need to sit there and like talk up all night about, well, why did it happen? It happened because you were busy and you couldn't plan that week, so you did what you did. Next, what would you do different next time? Let's come up with a different strategy. So it's no different for than any of us. It's all about just establishing habits and then keeping in the routine of those habits and consistently doing them over and over and over and over and over and over again. All right, number 4, last one.
The next one's kind of funny. The person says, honestly, I'm not a stalker. I'm 61 and still in the mountains. I chase protein through supplements and diet. I aim for 1 gram per pound of weight. Can you speak to protein requirement changes as we get older and what an optimum protein target would be based on weight, age, etc.?
Yeah, I thought this was funny. I'm not a stalker. And kudos to you, 61, still in the mountains. How old's Joe? I don't know. He's older than that. He's 65. I don't know. My father-in-law, Lindsay's dad, is still in the mountains and an animal. And I just hope that's me one day. All right, so you got a lot going on here in the question. So he's in the mountains. He's getting protein through supplements as well as whatever he eats. He aims for 1 gram per pound of weight per day. I'm not going to dive into whether that's right or not. We've covered that before, but I will cover this part because this is what he asks directly. Can you speak to the protein requirements changes as we get older? What an optimum target would be based on weight and age? Yes. So as we get older, there's several things to keep in mind. Number one, the retention of muscle you have to have protein present in the diet to keep the muscle that you have. As we get older, we lose muscle on a year by year, decade by decade basis at a fairly alarming rate starting in your mid 30s, right? So you've already got a major strike against you in the sense of the body is naturally trying to lose this. So the protein needs that are already exists, it's important to actually hit those. Number 2, there's research that also shows us that the signal that triggers the retention and or building of muscle is not as strong as we get older. So sometimes you need a higher protein intake to trigger that signal. So in a nutshell, yes, as you get older, it does become more important. The requirements do change to some degree. We're going to speak to this a little bit more here in a second. He then goes on and he says he tries to get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. You could go that high, but you really don't need per pound of body weight. You want to target lean muscle mass. So if you just happen to have an affinity for a lot of protein, depending on what your body weight is, I mean, like let's say this guy weighed 170 pounds, it's really challenging to get 170 grams of protein in every single day for a lot of people. So a more realistic target would be 1 gram per pound of lean mass because you're trying to retain the muscle, not necessarily everything in the body. My general recommendation is this. Number 1, to do the absolute most that you can to retain muscle as you get older and meet those protein requirements as they adjust is engage in regular strength training 3 to 5 times a week to make sure that you are doing everything you can to keep what you have and or potentially build some if you haven't already got it. Most research says the best thing that you can do, start resistance training young, build as much muscle as you can, and then work to keep it as you continue to get older. So your 20s and your 30s are prime conditions for you to be able to build muscle, and then you spend your 30s through the rest of your life trying to keep as much as you can. Number 2, even if you can't meet that maximum protein threshold for the day, it would be better for you to have regular doses of protein throughout the course of the day. So if you can't meet 170 grams in the previous example, but you find that you can get 20 grams in every 2 to 3 hours and you only reach 120 on the day, it would still be a great thing to aim for because you're constantly exposing that muscle to protein. Every time you eat protein, you get protein in your bloodstream. That protein in your bloodstream gets directed towards the muscle. So if you've got a constant, steady drip of protein coming in, even if you're not meeting that maximum threshold, you are getting nearly as close as you can. And then third point is along those same lines. Whatever that total ends up being on that, I wouldn't stress about it. I would try to target regular protein doses throughout the course of the day, strength train several times a week, following some sort of a progressive overloading type of a program. And then remember, as you continue to get older, that signal is not as strong. So it may take more than what you had to have in your 30s to trigger that signal. Lindsay said, what signal? There is the nerd speak for this signal is called muscle protein synthesis. And what that is it's basically saying that you need a certain amount of protein to trigger the muscle to say, take this protein and shuttle it towards the muscle so it can either keep it or build it, or whatever that person is trying to do at that point in time. Thank you guys for joining us this week. We've got several more episodes lined up through the end of the year, and we're excited to introduce you to those as well as the guests that we've got coming on for those. We are in the middle of a Foundations Plus group right now with a great group of folks that are learning more and more about nutrition. If you're ever interested in that, we are going to open enrollment for the January class early, probably mid-November or so. So if you're interested in that, be sure to stay tuned. I also want to let you know that we started doing some stuff on YouTube. I don't release that very often in social media, but everybody who is on our newsletter list gets cued into when those new videos go up. And again, those are just, our attempt at trying to answer some of these questions more thoroughly to help you understand how to get these things down in a correct way that are important to you. And obviously, there's only so much you can do that with social media, but YouTube seems to be kind of the trend towards the longer format where people can turn it on and do other things while they listen to some of these answers. So we've got a number of those coming out as well. So if you're interested in information on that, you can sign up for our newsletter to be sure to not miss any of those, or you can also check out our YouTube directly and subscribe, and then it will also be uploaded every time we upload a new video. I'm not quite ready to hold myself accountable to frequency of posting on there. It's already kind of a lot to take on the podcast and be sure that our clients get the attention that they deserve, as well as the folks in the Foundations Plus group, as well as sleep. So my goal, though, is to be sure to put as much on there as possible built around the questions that you all want to have answered. So again, everything's either on our website, v2pnutrition.com. You can subscribe to our newsletter. That's probably the best way to stay up to date on information, or you can obviously check the social platforms periodically, which sounds like a lot of work if you're interested in learning about it. So anyway, thank you for listening to this. Thank you guys for the great feedback that you're giving us every week. Thank you for sending questions. It makes our job so much easier to talk about things you want to know about instead of me having to dream up topics. So we appreciate you. If you're interested in Foundations Plus, the January cohort, you can check that out on the website as well. We will be back again with another one of those new episodes I mentioned earlier here in a couple of weeks. Have a great week, everyone.